Oh, I can't play anyway, but with Dad got it even less, so so that's why Kris is here. Sound good. Have you played the fan fret before?
Just for a few minutes, yeah.
It's very interesting. I thought when I was watching people playing a fan fret, I thought, gosh, you know, look at those frets. You're going to have to learn how to play guitar all over again. And in fact, even me, who can't play, could play equally as badly in about 5 minutes on the fan fret. So, you know, it's very intuitive, and so if you're interested in the fan fret, don't let it put you off.
Yeah.
So maybe to start, if I could ask Kris, would you mind, Matt?
Please,
Kris,
yeah.
Kris, to have a go on the fan fret?
Sure, yeah, why not?
Just to let you hear.
Just like we rehearsed it.
Just like we rehearsed it. If I wrote this down, it would be, I would leave it in about 30 seconds. So I've tried it before, it doesn't work. Throw the notes away. So.
Thanks, Matthew. Well, I find the trick with these is to not look at them.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm nervous, so I'm going to be looking a lot.
there any guitar makers here? Just one. I remember once I was invited to speak in Lewis in the south of England, and there was a room, many more people than normally come to hear me speak. There was about 120 people in the room, and I asked how many guitar makers were there, and I think about half, or just over half of them, were guitar makers. So I asked the question because I'm going to change what I talk about depending on you know, whether it's guitar players or guitar makers. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the story of how it all started and how it progressed to here. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the design and what drives the design of these guitars and how that all came about. And then there'll be plenty of time for questions as well. And if you think of a question during when I'm speaking, just feel free to put your hand up, and I'll try and answer at that point. Yeah. So the story starts 1961 or thereabouts, when I was about 10 years old and the Beatles were just coming on the scene. I think it was 61, around about then. And obviously something about these guys playing guitar and having all the adulation and everything must have struck a chord in my young heart, because ever from that point on I was fascinated by guitar. And in fact, my friend whose father was a boat builder, I pestered him to help us as kids to make a little guitar. So we got some 2x2s, I think it was. We got some hardboard, and you know, he cut out a sort of figure-8 shape and cut a sound hole out, and then we sort of screwed it all together so you had this kind of fake guitar front, and on the back was a square box, and we used fishing line for strings, and then we pranced around the garden, and we thought we were going to be Ireland's answer to the Beatles. It was, but at that time, of course, I had no idea that I would spend my life building guitars, but obviously something was in there from the very beginning. And then when I was 18, I had another go, this time on the solid body electric, because by that time I was into Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix and Peter Green and other players like that who were just awesome to me. And so I tried to make a solid body electric, and it was weird. I mean, it was completely out of proportion. It had these two big horns at the front that were like, so they were nearly as big as the back bit, and it was just completely wrong. But I had this, obviously I just wanted to do it. And then I had another go, I think, when I was about 19 or 20, and built another electric. This time it was more recognizable as a guitar, and you could actually play it even. And I used a stereo wiring loom, and it was almost a professional instrument in a way, so, but it wasn't very good. Then when I was about 24, through a process of I suppose you could call it soul searching, I decided to start making acoustic guitars, and I felt this was the right thing for me to do. And I had no training, no woodwork training, no guitar making training, no nothing. So it was kind of, you have to remember this was the hippie period, so people did wacky things and weren't afraid to do wacky things, and I wasn't afraid. I was 22, I wasn't 24. Not that it would have made any difference, I still would have had to go. But so, and in those days, you have to remember also there was no internet, so you couldn't go and Google in, you know, bending a guitar side or carving a guitar neck or anything like that. You know, there was no information, and there were no schools, and in Northern Ireland there were no guitar makers either. It was a question of, I got a little book about this thick, I still have it, which was telling you how to build your own folk guitar, basically. And that was what I used to as a starting point. But even then, I was so naive that I thought, well, I looked at this thing and I saw the way it was all the designs inside and out, and I looked at it and I thought, do you know what, I think if I did this, if I moved that strut that way, and if I put this strut here, and I think it might be better. So I did. Never having built an acoustic guitar before, here I was, doing silly things. But the truth is that I think that the fact that I wasn't frightened to try things that weren't right was instrumental in helping me to have a path of learning which was different. That's the way I did things. And the first guitars I made, 3 guitars together, that was also another mistake, because it meant that every mistake that I made on guitar 1, I also made on guitar 2 and guitar 3, because I was doing them at the same time. And I should have made one and then stood back and looked at it, and I didn't do that. Very naive. I sold all 3 of those guitars for about £60, that's about $90 each. And they were terrible. I mean, really, they were awful. I mean, sound-wise, they were very encouraging, enough for me to want to keep on doing it. I was so shocked at how good they sounded, but the workmanship was absolutely atrocious, because I didn't know what a spoke shave was, and I certainly didn't know how to sharpen it. And, so therefore the heel here, I mean, the heel, if anybody knows anything about guitar making, they should know that the shape of the heel here is like a guitar maker's signature, and it should be elegant, and it should be hand carved, and it should look really good. Well, mine looked like it had been carved on a doorstep. It was really that bad. It was just awful. But I learned from it, and the next ones were a little bit better, and I sold those for, I think, £75, and then the next ones were a little bit better, and I sold those for 90. And I didn't have any money. Flo and I got married after 1 year of guitar making, so we were really poor, but I was very happy making guitars. And didn't have too many disasters. I remember after about 2 years, and the guitars were starting to become much more satisfying to me, and I was getting a reputation by that stage. And I remember a school teacher coming down to see me, who repaired guitars in his spare time, and he was a craft and design teacher, and he'd heard about me, and he came down to visit me, and he was looking around and talking to me, and then he had a look at my tools on the wall, and he said, "George, would you mind very much if I took those away and ground them up for you?" And I said, "No, be my guest." I didn't even know what a grinder was. I mean, I'm not joking. I used a 2-sided sharpening stone, a coarse side and a fine side, and that was all I knew how to do it, the only way I knew. So he took them away, brought them back nicely hollow ground and nicely honed, and then I realized, oh my goodness, this is so much easier to do the work, and so from that time on, I just started to learn about woodwork, and it would have been a lot easier if I had known that to start with, So, so that's really where I started, and then I would say around about 1980, I started to get orders from, well, actually before that, about 1978, I started to get orders from France, and from Switzerland, and from London, and I started to employ people, which was, if you think about it, 4 years after starting, or 3 years after starting, I started to employ people, which was a pretty dumb thing to do, really, because I didn't know enough. but I had a lot of orders, and people really liked the guitars, and so I couldn't do it myself, so I started to teach other people. And after 2.5 years of that, by 1980, all I had was a very good reputation and evidently nice guitars because people wanted them, and a huge overdraft. So I don't know if overdraft's the same word you use here, but yeah. And if you remember, in 1980, interest rates were like 19% or something stupid, you know. So I didn't know what to do. So I decided to sell. By that time, we had a small house, and we decided to sell it and use the equity on that to get rid of the overdraft and start all over again. So I was back working on my own, still getting plenty of orders, and a shop in Switzerland that was buying my guitars asked me if they could try and find another company to build the guitars under license to me. So I said, well, you can try. And they came up with a small company in Japan who wanted to build my guitars under license. At that time, the acoustic guitar market was going down, 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 down. A lot of factories were closing, and so they were very keen to get something new that they could do. And I went to Japan, sent me tickets. I flew by Aeroflot. That was an interesting experience at the time. And for me, it was a huge adventure. You know, I was 27 or 28, something like that, and going to Japan and talking to these guys out in the woods. I mean, this was a small factory, way out in the country, and I was just shocked by the workmanship that I saw there. Those guys were very hard-working, very dedicated. They had tools that I couldn't believe, hand tools. So the first thing I did was buy a lot of Japanese hand tools, and they taught me how to sharpen them. And from that moment on, I never looked back as far as tools were concerned. I brought some with me. Have you got? Sorry, I should show you a few of those. Oh, put this somewhere. Here. This is my bike. So. See what I've got in here. So I just brought a few with me just to show you. This is a little Japanese plane, and it's very kind of rudimentary looking, but that's where rudimentary ends. The steel is just, it's made from this, it's the same kind of technology they use for samurai swords. So it's laminated steel. So the back of the blade is soft steel, and the cutting edge is very, very hard, and just works wonderfully. So when I discovered these, I also bought a huge big long one for jointing when I was there. So these are just, you can have a look afterwards if you want. Then I discovered Japanese chisels. I've got a bit of tape over these just in case. They are really, really sharp. And one time I was interrupted by a student of mine, and I nearly cut my finger off with one of these. I had to go and have a general anesthetic and so that I could put it all back together again. But so they're extremely sharp, and when you cut yourself with them, you don't even know you've done it until it's too late. So these are, and they're ergonomically designed very well. So if you look at it carefully, you can see there's a kind of a curve to it. So the handle is sort of cranked back the way, and this makes it very easy to work with in certain situations, particularly for luthiers who are doing a lot of pairing of struts and so on. So that's that. And then this is actually an American plane. I wish that I had discovered this 30 years ago. This is made by Lee Nielsen. I'm sure some of you may be familiar with that. And this is just phenomenal little plane for handwork. It's very heavy, very, very accurate, and you can take whisper shavings off with that, even off end grain if it's sharpened correctly. And I will explain why that's important. And finally, this weapon. I think I will take this off, but I'll actually tell you what I won't, because so if you look carefully, you'll see this very sharp, long bladed carving knife. Maybe you can see it right. I'll take this off, but please promise me you won't touch this, because it is a little bit dangerous. There was once I didn't know, and I was going through the airport, and I had one of these in my carry-on. I had literally forgotten it was there, and the girl said to me, she said, "Have you got anything sharp in there?" I said, No. And then she took this out. So it's a pretty dangerous looking weapon. It's used mostly for carving this part of the neck, the volute. So it can be done very quickly with this, and that's really good. I learned that in Japan. I saw the guys carving a volute with these, and they carved it in about 2 or 3 minutes. Whereas, I was used to kind of using a rasp and, sanding it, using a rasp, and it might have taken me 20 minutes or half an hour to do it. So when you've got the right tool, and when you see somebody else doing it quickly, it's a revelation, So that's that. I better be careful not to put that on my carry-on. They're very hard to find, so I was very annoyed that day, because she just took it and chucked it in the bin. It's my fault anyway. There you go. So so here I was, 1980. Working with a little Japanese company, and they were making about 1,000 guitars a year for me, which meant that the good thing about that was the guitars were out in the marketplace. The bad thing was that in those days, I think faxes were just beginning to come in. So the only way to communicate really was by typing letters, snail mail. And so we would be sitting there typing a letter, talking about whatever, voicing the struts slightly differently, or gluing the bridge on a different way, or whatever. And then by the time they got the letter, another one would have crossed with mine on the way back, and it was very, very difficult to manage it at such a distance. But it worked well, and after 5 years we had several dealers in different parts of the world. And that's all right. Hello. It worked very well. We did about 5,000 guitars during that period. And then the owners of the company, they wanted to move production of my guitars to another factory, which I wasn't so happy about. So I decided to set up the factory back in Ireland again. And that was the right thing to do. But again, I was commercially quite naive, and we didn't have any money, so we were always short of cash doing that. And by 1988, 89, we'd run out of money again, and things were still very bad, acoustic guitar-wise in the world. They were just starting to come back up again. The middle of the 80s was a disaster for acoustic guitars. Everybody was playing electronic keyboards and had round lapels and stuff like that. I mean, the 80s music was a period to forget. Sorry, I know they're coming back, but but they were a disaster for acoustic guitars, that's for sure. And then towards the end of the 80s, things started to improve a little bit. But by that stage, it was too late for us, and it was very difficult period for Flo and I in particular, because we had been working on this for something like 15 years by that stage, if my arithmetic serves me, 14, 15 years. And all we had done was build a reputation, build really good designs, and sort of lost money that we had at the beginning, and then lost money that we didn't have, and so on. And so it was kind of like, what do we do now? How do we move forward from here? And fortunately, a group of people came along who wanted to carry the business on, and they asked me to sign a licensing arrangement with them, which I did. And so that lasted for 14 years, and all of this while I was making guitars on my own, but also licensing my designs to that company. So it was kind of like I was always learning, I was always designing new guitars, but I didn't have to think about the business side of things very much, which was great, you know. But there were limitations to it, because for example, if I decided that I wanted to change something a little bit, it wouldn't have been a simple matter of me walking into the workshop and saying to the production manager, I would like to change, say, the bracing inside, or I would like to change the neck construction, or something like that. There was a protocol that had to be followed, and I wasn't very good at following protocol, so there was a little bit of tension here and there during that period. And looking back, I can see that, yeah, it was a situation that was tailor-made for tension. And would I have done it differently along the way? Yes, I'm sure, knowing what I know now. But you know, age gives you some kind of experience and wisdom, and you can't get that except if you go through the difficult times, you know. So, but anyway, by 2000 or so, just over 2000, things were getting very difficult in that relationship, and there were situations that were happening which, because my name was at the head of the company, it made me rather sensitive to what was happening within the company, understandably, and you know, it was leading to tensions. And in the end, I decided to step back, and felt there was no other option but a parting of the ways. So, as I'm sure you've realised, you know, this has been an incredibly up and down journey for me and for us. But I'm glad to say that even though that period was very difficult between 2000 and 2003, where this parting of the ways was taking place, what's happened since then until now has been really wonderful, because now we have the company. I don't have to, I don't mean this to sound the wrong way, but I don't have to have a committee meeting if I want to change something. And I can go around the workshops and I can show the craftsmen things, and I'm not treading on anybody's toes. And so it really works. It really works very well, and I've got an excellent team around me now. My wife, my long-suffering wife, was the office at the beginning of this business in 2004, and but she's now retired, or well, she says she's retired, but actually she's not completely retired. But I have a good team now. I have two ladies in the office who do a great job. One who does the accounts and the other does administration. Then I have a sales manager, I suppose. Alistair, he works with the dealers all over the world. And I have my son-in-law, Dave, who looks after the business side of things. And I have 3 sons in the business as well. Pardon? And a daughter. Yes, my daughter is, I hadn't forgotten. Well, dare I forget. so I have a daughter in the business, and I had a daughter-in-law. So yeah, it's quite a family enterprise, and there's 26 people altogether, but they're not all in the family.
So you mean 28?
So I'm looking forward to sort of not, well, I'm handing over the business, if you like, because I'm 65 this year, and I'm gradually sort of, this is a transition period, but I'm not going to stop making guitars. I'm just going to change the way I do things. I'm going to spend more time at the bench, and maybe less time dealing with business things, which is great, you know. So before I talk about the guitars themselves, are there any questions about that?
Those early guitars, are they still in existence anywhere?
Well, the very, very early ones, unfortunately, yes, they are in existence. So I'm not actually sure where they are. Yes, yeah, they are. And there's a lot of the Japanese-built guitars still around. And I'm very proud of those, even though, you know, there were maybe some cosmetic things that I would have preferred to have been another way. Those Japanese craftsmen were really good and very dedicated, and so I'm proud of those guitars as well. Yeah. The ones that were built under license between 1989 and 2003, 2 or 3. I mean, I was in and out of the workshops then, you know, almost on a daily basis. You know, they were in large part what I wanted, but there were some things that I couldn't quite get the way I wanted them to be. Yep.
I guess to that point, I was going to ask you, how hard was it to let go of the production, not be involved day to day, hour to hour in production?
Well, I think at heart, you know, you have to remember that I was born in Northern Ireland, which wasn't exactly the sort of #1 destination for musicians back in the 70s and the 80s, you know, when we had all this political trouble. So I was kind of, you know, there were local people who bought my guitars, but there wasn't a big enough market locally because of that. So therefore, I was kind of destined to go down a semi-commercial route. But where I'm happiest is making my own guitars. And to answer your question, it was hard and it still is hard, especially if there's something that I see that I know isn't really the way I would like it to be. You know, then it really, and commercially it's difficult because, you know, if you're running a production company, whether it's a small one like I have, or a big one, when you see something that isn't quite right, you know, there's a pressure on you to let it go out the door, a financial pressure, and so I don't like that. I don't like having to even consider letting something go out the door which isn't 100%. So yeah, it's difficult, and I'm always trying to raise the bar, which is a challenge for the people who work for me. You know, because the standard that I'm trying to achieve is, you know, it requires more than you need to have a love for it, and you need to be a hard worker, and you need to be able to focus. If your idea of a good job is to come to work and have a bit of crack, as we say, you know, and go home, then you're not going to be happy working in my company.
Do you hire based on that, looking for that?
Well, we try to, and I really do have a very good team now, you know. And you know that the team that I have now are very, very dedicated. There are, you know, those guys are really working very hard and doing something to a level which doesn't come naturally. And so I want to pay tribute to the folk that I have back there who are working hard every day, trying to make these guitars to the standard that I would like to see them at. Yeah. But now, of course, I'm there every day, so so I can be a pain in the butt.
How many guitars are you building these days?
Building about 21 a week at the moment, and we're back ordered about a year, so we do need to increase our output, but I'm doing it very, very slowly, because quality is the number one rule. No compromise there.
Just wondering if Pierre's early guitars of yours, were they, where were they made? Like, were they licensed ones, or were they made by you? Or?
No, the first one, the one that he calls his old lady, I built for him in 1978.
You built it yourself?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I had a team of, at that time, I think I may have had 2 people helping me. I started in 1974, so by 1978 I should still have been working on my own. But there you go. So yeah, I built it in 1978, and it's still around and really sounding good. It doesn't have quite the punch of the newer ones, but it has a maturity and a 3-dimensional quality to it, which is something else. You know, Pierre still plays it and records with it sometimes, and yeah. And I think also another point is that a guitar develops partly according to the player that's playing it. So if a player is like Pierre, who's extraordinary, you know, he's going to pull everything out of that guitar that's possible to get out of it, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's no good getting a guitar and hanging it on the wall. You've got to sort of kill it and caress it, and you know, get everything out of it you can. And the more you do that, the better it gets.
George, I don't know if this is accurate, but it's rumored that, maybe I heard this from Michael Card, I think, who used, that you have a sort of faith component and how you approach, would you feel free enough to talk a little bit about that? Is there a relationship there that's important in how you approach things there?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to talk about that a little bit anyway, but seeing you've asked me the question, yeah, you know, when you come from Northern Ireland, if you talk about faith or religion or whatever, you know, it's kind of, you know, because there's so much really bad stuff has gone on in Northern Ireland, and of course they call it, you know, Protestant and Catholic, you know, and that's where the fight begins. In fact, it's not that at all. It's actually a political situation, that the political tensions rooted in history, and so yeah. So forgive me because I'm from Northern Ireland, but yes, there is first of all, I wouldn't be making guitars and would not have made guitars for the last 40 years, except for the fact that when I was 21, 22, I try not to compartmentalize my life. So that means that I don't have my leisure life, and my family life, and my business life, and my spiritual life. It's all rolled into one. So back then I was trying to find out what God might want me to do with my life. So it wasn't a question of what do I want to do. I had a good business, in fact, at that point. I was selling fashion clothes. Don't ask me how that leads into guitar making. But I was going around boutiques, you know, those were the days of loon pants. You remember, some of you are old enough to remember loon pants, and these huge, big, wide bell bottoms, and you know, no pockets and all those things. I could see you nodding. So I used to go around boutiques and take orders for these clothes for companies in England that were making them. You know, and I used to model the clothes and all that stuff. Gosh, it's almost embarrassing to think about it, but. So that was my lead-in. That was my lead-in to guitar making. So I had a good business, but I felt inside that I really wanted to make sure that the direction I was going in my life was where God wanted me to go. So I prayed, and prayed quite a lot for quite a while, and then I finally got to the point where I felt I should do this. And bear in mind, you know, as I said, I didn't have any experience at all of tools or anything. So I prayed, and this was kind of the way I prayed. I said, oh God, if I'm not completely nuts about this, could you maybe confirm some way or other that I'm on the right track, or, you know, and I wasn't really getting anywhere, and then finally I said, okay, Lord, if this is right, then I have this little book, and I can see from reading it that there are at least 3 problems in there. Number one, this book recommended that you had to go around second-hand furniture stores and buy second-hand furniture to get seasoned wood. And me being me didn't know any better. And I thought, well, what he was recommending was good, but from a commercial point of view, that's impossible. So that was not the first problem. The second problem was he recommended all kinds of ways of doing things suitable for somebody who doesn't have either any woodworking experience or any tools. And then there was a third problem, which escapes my mind right now. But anyway, that reminds me of a story that I'll tell you in a minute. So I said to the Lord, Lord, look, if this is right, then please show me the answer to those 3 questions. And to my surprise, within less than 24 hours, I had the answers to all 3, and that was without looking. I was walking up the street, and I saw in the window a little power tool, which I didn't know what it was, but I looked on the box that it was sitting on, and it showed you the sort of jobs that it could do, and I thought, my goodness, that could do quite a lot of what you need to do as a guitar maker. And it turned out this was a router, but I mean, I didn't even know of the existence of a router, literally. So that was the first thing. Second thing was I discovered there were several companies in England selling tonewood, and you could just phone up and order it. And then I forget what the third one was, but whatever it was anyway, I knew then, okay, I got to do this. So I bought some wood and I got some tools, and I just got started. And since then until now, because I know more, it's a lot harder to be as dependent on God as I was then. You know, in those days I used to, every problem I came across, I would pray and just say, hey, Lord, help me to think the right way about this. And it wasn't a cookie thing, you know, where I was wanting, you know, to wake up in the middle of the night with a flashing light on the wall or something, but I was really asking God to help me to think the right way about everything, because I know a lot of people don't believe in God. I do, and when I work with wood, I consider it a fantastic privilege to be working with this material that is infinitely varied, incredibly complex, so complex that scientists can't figure it out in totality. They can figure some of it out, but why does the wood from this tree sitting here be tonally so good, and the wood from this tree sitting here, it's not good? Well, of course they have ideas about that, and they can do measurements, but why does it happen in the first place? So it's a bit like, you know, the origin of the world. I mean, what was there to start with? These are all deep questions, but for me, I have a privilege of working with wood, and I just keep asking God for help, and that's the way I do it. And it's harder now than at the beginning, because I know more. So, if anybody wants to talk to me about that, feel free. Any other questions about that? Okay. So, I'm going to talk about guitar design a little bit. What sort of tend to flow? It's not too bad. I'm just wondering, Kris, if you would okay, just let me say something first. The first guitars that I designed were quite large-bodied, what are now called O series. So at the back then they weren't, and it's a bit confusing, and I'll not go into the reasons for that. But anyway, the O series were the first ones that I built, and Pierre's first guitar, for example, was an O series, and as he said earlier on, it was quite large. The sound from that kind of percolates out there. It doesn't drive out the way it does with a smaller guitar. but it kind of, you know, filters out there, and you can hear all this complexity in the tone, and it's very beautiful because of that. Also, the bass response, of course, is a little bit, it's quite deep, but it's not heavy. So the first thing that I had to think about was, okay, as I design new models, so the F came next, which was 1982, I think I designed the F. And it's called an F, by the way, because I designed it for flat picking. The funny thing is that it's a good flat picking guitar, but you can do whatever you like on it. As Pierre demonstrated, I've never seen a flat pick in your hand, Pierre, have I?
What?
I've never seen a flat pick in your hand, ever.
A plastic?
A flat pick.
A flat pick? No, I was much younger when I was playing the flat pick.
So I was just saying I designed this guitar for flat pick, but in fact you know, you can do whatever you like with it. But the tone is more, the focus is more direct. And then with the next model, the S, the focus is a little bit more direct again. And with the last model, the wee Lowden, it's even more direct. And therefore, as you go from the O to the F to the S to the wee, you have the impression, if you're sitting in front of them, that the volume is louder on the wee than it is on the O. But it's kind of because the focus is narrower. That's why. That's most of the reason why, not the complete reason. So one of the challenges for me was, as I designed these new models, was to try and get, for example, on a big guitar, bass is natural. Treble tends to get lost. So for me, having designed the O and having worked on the voicing of the strutting and the complexity of the geometry, you know, the shape of the back, for example, the depth of the body, the height of the internal braces. I'll show you those in a minute. And having done all that, then moving to an F, how was I going to get as much bass out of an F as I did out of the O, even though it would have a different character to it? And how would I then, moving to the S, also get more bass? And then eventually the wee, which is so small, how's that going to work? So, have you got your wee here?
Yeah, it's right there closest to you.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't want me to get it?
Would you mind if Kris played a little
No.
piece on it?
I'll grab it.
Thanks. Thank you. I couldn't afford this guitar, by the way, but
I can't either.
I'll tell you a little bit about this guitar in a minute, but anyway. Just to give you an idea of the totally different. If you play just a few bars on that of something,
The fingerstyle or pick?
a fingerstyle,
Sure.
and something not too fast
Okay.
to let it sort of breathe, and then we'll do the same thing on the same F. But we'll do it on the expensive F, will we? The really
Yeah,
expensive
you bet.
See, when he plays the open E, for example, you feel the depth of the bass for such a. It's going well, huh? When you hit it quite, I shouldn't say use words like hit, but when you play it quite hard like that, it doesn't flat out, it projects. So I'll try it on this one, maybe. Something, say, this one's equally expensive, so
Which one are we looking at here? This one?
yeah.
This is the one on Scared to Touch? Yes.
Yes.
Right, thanks.
The reason it's very expensive, by the way, is because of the Brazilian rosewood on the back and sides. which is, you know, CITES controlled and almost impossible to get these days. It still is the ultimate back and side tonewood, in my opinion, closely followed by Honduras rosewood and African blackwood. They're almost the same.
Same song. Get a
Right.
comparison?
Yeah, just to give an idea. That's the guitar that Paul wants, isn't that right? Almost, when I played this guitar the other day in the shop, you know, it was kind of one of those ones that gave me goosebumps up my arm, and you know, there's only been a few guitars like that over the years. I'm wondering, just for the sake of comparison, because when I was designing the guitar for Pierre, it was a shot in the dark in a way, because he had been playing the O model that I originally made from in 1978. He'd been playing that for a lot of years, and 25. So it was a shot in the dark to try and design something different for him. So I made two guitars and took them both over to Pierre's home, and to my surprise, he chose the one that I didn't think he would choose, and that just shows you, you know, that this journey that I'm on there's still an awful lot of mystery attached to it. I'm glad to say. You know. So, Pierre, I don't know whether you would play a few pieces on your guitar, or whether you would mind Kris doing it on your guitar, or.
You want to?
I want you to, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Just with the mic. So, let me do that without knocking something. Thanks, Pierre. Just a few bars to give us an idea.
A few bars, huh?
A few bars.
Just a few notes.
Irish bars. Sorry.
Irish bars. That's fine, that's fine. So I remember when you brought that guitar, George brought that guitar, which for me, I mean, we talked about the wood combination,
Yeah.
and I sort of told George I would be up for trying something completely different, mahogany, cedar.
Whatever. Yeah.
So he said, well, you know, it was very interesting to speak with you about your take on wood combination
Yeah.
and how it will result in sound. And so you did tell me a few things regarding spruce,
Yeah.
regarding Adirondack
Yeah.
and stuff, but there was a moment when you made up your mind and tell me, I'm going to do this in Adirondack, the top, and rosewood from Honduras, and I think it will be fine.
Yeah.
So this is very impressive, when the luthier is already able to translate into wood and a sonic projection or something for a musician that he knows. So you knew how I was playing and the fact that I was playing in that and everything. So you sort of had this intuition that this would work. And when you said you were surprised that I choose that one, In fact, I remember that you brought the two guitars. The other one was cedar and mahogany, but it was the same
It was
shape.
cedar Honduras. It was cedar and Honduras rosewood also, yeah.
And cedar and Honduran
That's it.
rosewood,
Yeah.
correct. So very different from
Yeah.
And I didn't choose that one.
No.
But we had my German agent, Klaus, who is also a very fine player, and he wanted a guitar by George. I said, why don't you come? And the one I'm not choosing, you can, if you want, you can have it.
You can have the reject.
And you know what? What's funny is that Klaus loved that other one. So he was very happy with that other one. And me, when I played that guitar, I remember what you said to me, this is a 3D guitar. And it's true. And you told me you have to be patient.
Mhm.
This guitar is going to be very fast. You have to play it a lot before it gives, you know.
It doesn't tune automatically.
Well, I know what you could do to make a guitar to tune automatically. You could make MIDI guitars.
Yeah.
No.
Think of the character. Think of the character you'd get out of the tone of those.
You can make MIDI guitars sounding like Lowden guitars. And always in tune.
But they would all sound the same, right?
Well, no. You could have a program for...
When you're listening to the treble notes, you know, you can hear this kind of what I call fatness. It's not thin at all. Now part of that's in their technique, you know, but part of it's in the guitar also.
No, it's not on the guitar, it's in my hand.
I saw you. It's great. You know, one of the things, this relationship between a player and the maker is something that's really important. Because if I as a maker approach a player and say, or you know, say to him or her, this is my guitar, you take it or leave it, which actually is the attitude of one or two people. And if I had that attitude, I would never learn anything. So for me, I always say, what can you tell me about this? You know, how do you feel about it? And in fact, it doesn't really matter what I think. It's what the musician thinks that really matters. And I've had musicians. I had one guy who wrote to me from the States who had given up playing classical. He was a classical guitar player, and he'd given up playing. And he wrote to me to say that he saw one of my classicals in the shop in Washington, D.C., and he bought it. And he said he just was so inspired and started to play again, and he was delighted. It lifted him out of depression that he was in. And for me, as a maker, you know, all that I need to know is whether the guitar inspires the musician a little bit or not. And if it does, then I'm happy. You know, so.
It's not always the case that you can follow a guitar. Sometimes the guitar comes away from you, but
Yeah.
you don't see that guitar again.
Yes.
And for instance, the first guitar you made for me, you saw the guitar all the time.
Yeah, 78. Yeah.
All the time. So you could also see how that guitar was aging and what it was doing.
And how we were aging as well.
Oh yeah. That's true. That's a good point. It's
That's a
okay.
good point, yeah.
Yeah. It's okay.
So, but it is true that guitar, I mean, from my point of view, listening to it, I was saying it doesn't have quite the punch as it used to have, but it does have a three-dimensional.
The old one.
Yeah, the old lady.
The old lady.
It has a maturity, and sweetness of tone that
Yeah.
that's exceptional. Huh?
You know, yeah, I think it was a couple of years ago, I went on tour in England with my 3 guitars, with this one, with the old lady, and the new old lady, because George made me 2 signature guitars. And I was going to play only the new old lady, which I did. And I brought the 2 others so that when I would come and visit you, you could have a look at the guitars and tune them. And one morning I was staying at friends in Cumbria, and my friend said, "You have the old lady with you?" I said, "Yeah, can I see it?" "Yeah, sure." So he took the guitar and he played with it, and I was thinking, would you mind to give me this guitar again? And I started to play with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we all looked at each other, and the new old lady went back into its case. And I never played that new old lady again. I'm so sorry, I have to confess. I haven't played it yet since. I even went to China with the old lady.
You need somebody to play it?
But you see, there's something about this which is, I met my wife when she was 15, and you know, so the training program began very early, and no, actually it's a mutual training program, I know, but it is true that you know, there is something that age and playing puts into a guitar that you cannot get any other way. And I know there are devices that you can buy which are supposed to excite the guitar and get it moving and all that. It's not.
I'm sorry, it's all. I'm not going to say the word, but.
Yes, I get the impression what you mean. Yeah.
So people put their guitar in a closet and it vibrates all night long, and I don't have to touch it. Okay. And you might as well, you know, forget about it if you want to touch your guitar. Yeah, but you know, when you're sleeping, the guitar still vibrates and it's aging this way. Oh, like a wine you put in the cellar.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
I have to say something, George.
Well shaken.
A guitar is made by 2 hands for 2 hands, and it's true that how can I say that, the interaction between the luthier and the player is very important. And I have to say I'm very proud and happy that I've been playing your guitars almost all my life, almost all my life. And when you play a guitar, the luthier is never far away. It's not like he's omnipresent, not at all. The luthier is like the musician. The presence is at the end of the day in the music. And we forget the musician, we forget the luthier, we forget the guitar, we forget the sound, we forget the PA, we forget everything. And that's the best compliment. When an instrument is reaching the ear so that the only thing that you listen is the music and no longer the instruments, it means the instruments is great. So my guitar, my first guitar, when I took that guitar in England, when I played My Old Lady again, I felt like I was home. It was amazing. It felt like the guitar has been always waiting for me, available for me, and was very patient, like, oh, you are going to see and play those youngsters, but you will come back to me. And I really did. It was amazing. And everybody listening to that guitar, you know, you said it lost a bit of punch, but I don't know, maybe a bit of sustain and treble notes.
That's what I mean, yeah.
But it still has so much, it's like an old Stradivarius.
Yeah, that's it. And of course, the unknown, the question which will probably never be answered is if the new old lady would be the same 20 years from now.
I hope we'll find out.
Yeah, but then it would need to be played, so maybe we need...
You will give me your phone number?
I live not far from yours.
Yeah, but you need to play it.
Huh? You have my word?
Okay.
I know that this is a true story, that there's a shop in New York somewhere where it's a famous shop for classical and flamenco guitars, and the guy who owned it he had a way, if he got an important customer coming in looking for a high-end guitar, he would say, I have just a guitar that might work for you, but I think it's downstairs. If you just give me a little while, I'll find it for you. And he would send the apprentice down, and the apprentice knew what to do. The apprentice knew to go into a room and close the door and hit that guitar so hard for as long as he could manage to keep the guy upstairs, 5 minutes or whatever, and then he would bring it up and say, I found it. And what he was doing was bringing that guitar back to life. And I find this with new guitars, that that when you first play them, you know, they sound okay. And sometimes they sound better than okay. But you then put it in the case for a while, and you come the next day and you take it out and you play it again, and it sounds not so good. The longer you play it, you can actually hear it changing. And then you put it back in the case, and the same thing happens the next day. Eventually you get to a point where when you take it out of the case, it sounds the way it sounded yesterday. But at the beginning, you have to play it, to really, really play it. Sometimes I would go to Europe with the guitar, two classical guitars in guitar cases, and go to the hotel room before going on to wherever I was going. And I would take the guitars out and play them. I've done something wrong, these things sound good. And then the next morning, they would sound like a totally different instrument. So this is what happens when guitars are new. You know,
What's
yeah.
actually happening in the wood that's causing the change over the years? Is it the plasticity?
you mean when it's new?
Or like
Okay.
when you're playing a lot and it starts to open up, what's actually happening? Is it glue that, like, is it things just relaxing? Or?
To be honest, I've thought about that, but I'm not 100%
Yeah.
sure. I think it might be just that the wood is learning. Wood has a memory, so it may well be learning how to vibrate when you play it different ways and different frequencies and different types of ways of playing.
And the wood doesn't know he's a guitar yet.
Yeah, that's it.
You still remember being a tree.
Yeah, and also the wood was a bit sore from all the work that was being done. But yeah.
But it's funny what you say about the wood. The wood has a memory.
Yeah.
And I think the wood also changes by the nature of the music you play with it.
Absolutely.
And the frequencies are in fact creating a presence, a tangible presence of the wood. The wood changes with the frequencies that are, being played.
Yeah.
The wood changes, so that's why a guitar is going to bonify all the time.
Yeah.
Any instrument would.
I remember when